That awkward pause. All right, welcome everyone. I am Kate from the Literary Apothecary, and I'm joined tonight by my friends Jessi and Andrew, and we are so excited. Tonight we are talking to the man himself, Nicholas Eames, author of the band Kings of the Wyld and Bloody Rose, and we are like bouncing out of our chairs for this. We've been so excited for this, talking about it forever, and it's finally here. So we're going to start off tonight with kind of a spoiler-free chat, just general thoughts about the books in the series, and then we'll dive into spoilers, talking about Kings of the Wyld Book 1, and then Bloody Rose Book 2, and at the end, we'll open it up for questions from y'all out in the audience. So without further ado, let's get into spoiler-free chats.
Yay.
I started reading this series because Jessi talked about it nonstop in her videos. She's like, Kings of the Wyld, Kings of the Wyld, Kings of the Wyld.
I'm shocked.
80s fantasy, 80s music. I'm like, okay, you've sold me just by saying 80s, because most of the music I listen to is 80s music still. Everyone laughs at me. They're like, what's playing in your car? I'm like, 80s music?
Wow.
What songs have you listened to lately? I'm like, 80s music? I listen to 80s music getting ready for this show. So
it never got worse, but it didn't get much better. So
That's a good way to say that.
I think so.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
One of the things that, besides all the amazing 80s references in this, one of the things that stuck to me the most, especially after I finished Kings of the Wyld, was the characters. They were so memorable, and yet they felt like they were real people in a fantasy world, and I felt like I could be best friends with any of them. And I just wanted to go and have a drink with them all.
Perfect.
I wanted to have a drink with Moog. Just because you never know what A, the drink is gonna be, and then B, you don't know what that drink is gonna do.
Yeah.
In fact, Moog doesn't. So that always sounded like fun.
Dang. Yeah, I know. I kept saying I want it to be a musical. That was my thing. I'm like, I could see Broadway musical just radiating off of this.
Totally.
Of the initial band, like as soon as I start to say the name Saga, there we go. Of Saga, who was your favorite to write?
Probably Moog is my favorite to write. Obviously, like my favorite characters is definitely like Clay, but Moog's the one that I usually kind of try to put one of these in each book with somebody that can say absolutely anything, any joke I want to get away with, especially now that I'm being edited. I know I'm being edited. Anything I'm trying to get away with, I just put it in this one character's mouth. So it's obviously Moog in the first book, and it's a character named Roderick in the second book. And then
I love Roderick.
A character just like that, not just like them, but a character in the third book too. That's going to be, my get away with anything character.
Oh, I'm excited.
Yeah.
Who is the character that was the easiest to write? Who came to you the most?
Well, Ganelon, because he says so little. So, yep, nope, done. Ganelon, over, sorted. Well, Clay's definitely the most natural, just because he's the most kind of similar to me. He's an older guy. We have some things in common, and then our back hurts when we wake up in the morning, and but yeah, so he's obviously fairly easy to write, and his sense of humor is very similar to mine, kind of dry and optimistic but pessimistic at the same time. If that makes any sense.
And Clay Cooper.
Right.
Yeah.
I loved, and especially in the first book, Kings of the Wyld, just the idea of having these like older men. Because I feel like it isn't something we see super, super often. It's always like the teenager that saves the world.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but I don't relate to that in my 30 plus years of age. Like,
Yeah.
I want to see somebody older,
Right.
whose back hurts and knees crack and you know, has some gray hair going on. Like,
You're describing my life, and it's making me sad.
Andrew, do you
It
feel
doesn't get
seen?
better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you do. I mean, you occasionally do get older characters in books, but you don't necessarily get them like you're not in their head, and
Mhm.
their infirmity isn't, if that even is the right word, isn't like a major part of the story.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like they're either old and amazing, or they're too old and they don't fight.
A lot of times the older characters are like the teachers or the mages that, you know, teach the young kids, and then the young kids go off and save the world. But with
Yeah.
our band, I also liked that they were like just honest guys, you know. They just said whatever came to their head, and they had, you know, the old fart jokes and, you know, jokes that you would hear guys of that age drinking around a fire or around a bar making. It wasn't, you know, glamorized or anything.
Mhm.
Well, those of you who've just experienced American Thanksgiving will know that
Yeah.
sometimes your older relatives do just say whatever
Oh,
comes
yes.
up.
Usually that person is me because I have no
Yeah.
filter.
For better or worse.
Yeah. I would say it
Um,
reminds me a lot of like my dad, because my dad's, you know, he's much older. He's in his 70s, and he was a Vietnam veteran. So it's just like him sitting around telling his old like war stories, and it's like, what did you say? Like,
Yeah.
what?
One
Did
of
that
my
really happen? Are you making this up a little bit? Like,
one of my favorite things that happened, well, like one of the themes, is just very much of, hey, we need to get the band back together. And Clay Cooper is just like, that's not going to happen. And then, like, as they approach each member, it's like, nah, I'm ready for this midlife crisis. Let's go.
Yeah.
And it's always just like, there's no way he's going to come with us. Oh, he's coming.
right?
Yeah,
Like, there
in
you
the end,
go.
Clay's the only really reluctant one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody else was just like, get me out of here. Let's go. I loved that they still felt like a family. They still felt like brothers in arms. And I think that's something that the book does incredibly well, is it taps into that sense of just found family. And, you know, how far will you go just for friendship?
Mhm.
Yeah. And it kind of, at least for me, it, as a reader, it brought me into that family. Sometimes you see found family and you're like, I want to be part of that family, but I'm not. But for me, the guys, I felt like I was, you know, part of that family, going along the journey with them instead of just hearing about it afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really like the whole concept too. It's like friendship isn't like you just, you know, you see each other all the time and you talk all the time. You can go years and years and years without seeing each other, speaking to each other, and then pick right up like where you left off, like it was nothing. Like
In
that
Ganelon's
is-
case,
right?
yes.
Yeah, especially in Ganelon's case.
Right where you left off.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think that's something that's kind of common too among you know, band members, because what they go through often kind of, they live through like maybe squalor together or hard times. They live in a van or on a bus. And so, yeah, they get pretty damn close. And you know, the same goes for even someone like who's like maybe in the military. You know, you can bond with those people over something, and then see them 20 years later, 30 years later, and maybe not much time has gone by.
Yeah, as I know, like with military, like my dad has recently reconnected with people that like he was in the military with years and years and years ago, and it's like nothing ever changed.
Yeah.
One thing I want to know is kind of like, so I have this vague memory of you talking to Daniel Green saying you were a waiter when you got like the idea for Kings of the Wyld.
Mm-hmm.
And like you were still waiting tables and writing this book and like late at night. And I just kind of want to know like that time in your life and like what pushed you to write Kings of the Wyld, and like what did it mean to you that you got to finally write your story?
Well, but when I was writing Kings of the Wyld, I'd been doing that kind of thing for so long, because I'd spent probably, 10 years, you may have heard in that interview or another one, writing a whole another book that will never see the light of day. That was like a big, fat, Robert Jordan inspired monster. that was and it was like, much like the fantasy of the time, it didn't really have that many fantasy elements in it. It was just like people and war and culture and religion. And it was, if you had told me you should put an orc in there or a goblin, I'd have been like, no, listen, I'm 30, old for goblins. And then it wasn't until I turned 35 and I thought, you know what, goblins might work. So,
Goblins are fun.
Goblins
Exactly.
and then I feel like it turned into like, let's just put them all in there and make it even better.
That's pretty much what it was. It was kind of like the backlash against everything I'd been doing for the last 10 years. But yeah, that time was, it was kind of same old. I just kind of plucked away at it. Sometimes as you're getting older, the more compelling reason you have to kind of not go out on a Friday night with your fellow restaurateurs and instead work. But a kind of a more bizarre time was after Kings of the Wyld was published, because the entire time I wrote Bloody Rose, I was also working in restaurants. And yeah, so that was a bizarre experience. Like I remember like every day I would go to work listening to the climax song of Bloody Rose on repeat. And then go there and get written up for something stupid and get dragged into the office and for some of the stupidest things in the world, and then be like, okay, can you let me go so I can go home and write the climax of this character?
Right, can I get cut now?
Yeah. So that was definitely a strange time too.
Did you have anyone recognize you between writing Kings of the Wyld and releasing it and then writing Bloody Rose, working at a restaurant? Did you ever have anyone recognize you?
No, because the book, I lived in a relatively small town when that came out. I was in Kingston, Ontario. I have had like maybe one or two people on the street there say something to me, but not while I was working there, and certainly not unless it was like my neighbor showed up in my section. Like, oh, look, it's the author. Yeah, so that's about it.
Yeah,
So
restaurant life is a whole beast.
It is a beast. I loved it.
So like when you got published, like did you, I don't actually know this, did you self-pub it first and then get published, or did you just get straight published?
No, just straight published.
Okay.
So like when you got that letter of, hey, we're going to take your book, did you do a dance? And can you recreate the dance for us?
Well, when I first got the letter, by then I had gotten so many rejection letters that I kind of didn't believe it was real. And especially with I had an agent that was kind of on the hook with Kings of the Wyld, that we went back and forth on a lot of stuff, and then eventually he passed on the book. He didn't die. But I thought I had him for sure. I thought when he said, I'm not saying no, but I'm not saying yes, I was like, I've got an agent. This is great. But he eventually said no, and I had to start sending it out again. And thankfully, and this is a story you may have heard before too, but I was working at a restaurant, and Sebastian de Castel, the author of The Greatcoats, came in, and it was through him that I started talking to him, and he eventually put me in touch with his agent, who eventually she read the book, read the sample chapters I sent to her, and I sent her the whole book. And so I was home visiting my family, and I was with my mom in the car. I had just gotten out of a bookstore, bought the whole Brent Weeks quartet or quintet, and came out and saw that I had an email, saw it was from Heather, and I was like, your heart already kind of just like steels itself for rejection. And then I just kind of skipped to the end, and it said something about offering me representation. And I was like, Mom, can you pull the car over? Because we just started driving. And so we pulled the car over, and I told her, and yeah, it was a pretty happy day. And obviously that's just representation. And at the time I thought it for sure meant you get a book deal, and it still isn't the case, but it's pretty damn close to getting a book deal. And then the book deal thing came about 6 or 7 months later. And that's also obviously very surreal. But the agent, I remember getting more just because it's such a huge hurdle in an author's life, that all those days, the days we had like the phone call, your first phone call, I remember I was visiting my dad, who lived on a boat. He lived in this like harbor. And so I was just on the phone in disbelief the whole time, so that day is crystal clear for me and will always be.
That's awesome. I love the Greatcoats. So I actually didn't know that Sebastian is the one who was just like, oh, don't worry, I got you.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Yeah, he was like, he came into my restaurant, which was called Fable, which I named the band in the second book after.
Oh, that's so cool.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
I mean, it worked that it fit. It was like a name like Saga. It means the same thing, so that really worked out well. But the restaurant was called Fable. And yeah, he came into the restaurant, and this is when I was still writing the book for the first time. And I saw his name on the thing, and I was like, oh my God, it's Sebastian de Castell. It was his wife's birthday, and I shamelessly told him I was writing a book. And then we just kind of
You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Exactly.
But I end up seeing him again at this Writers Festival, and he remembered who I was, and like I just went there to see him, and he was like, "How's the book?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's almost done." And then when it was done, he came into the restaurant again, and by then this agent had said no, and so he knew that agent was a pretty good agent, and that if that agent was that close to taking it, that it might not be awful. So
might not be awful.
Yeah. We also went for coffee just to kind of just talk about the publishing business in general, and he gave me a hardcover copy, a really unique copy of Greatcoats that said, "Consider this a down payment for a copy of your first novel." And so a couple of years later, when there was a hardcover special edition of Kings of the Wild, I got to repay that debt.
I've seen those, and I am always so envious that I never snagged one. The ones with the sprayed edges.
Yeah, the Bloody Rose have sprayed edges. Yeah.
Yeah, Bloody Rose had red sprayed edge. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. Well, you never know. I think maybe when the third book comes out, if they do a hardcover of that too, which I don't see why they wouldn't.
Just do a box set. Just do a box
Yes.
set. Box set, sprayed edges. That's all I'm asking for.
Me too. Yeah.
It's not too much to ask for.
Right.
I
So
agree.
let's go into specifics on Kings of the Wild, Book 1. So for anyone out there who, for whatever reason, we will not judge, haven't read the books yet, if you haven't read Book 1 yet, leave now, go buy the book, buy a couple for your friends and family too, and read
Just
it.
go buy 10 copies. That's
Go buy them all.
You won't regret it.
There's an amazing playlist that goes along with it, so listen to the playlist while you read it.
Yeah.
You see, I didn't know that. I didn't read it with the playlist.
Also has
Yeah.
a really
You
awesome
definitely don't have
audio.
to, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think it can kind of enhance afterwards if you kind of know what certain songs go with certain scenes, or just kind of get the vibe of certain things. It helps. And the Bloody Rose one isn't as like rigid. Like the Kings of the Wild one is like chapter for chapter, but the Bloody Rose one is kind of all over the place. But it is in chronological order, sort of. So
Very cool.
yeah.
So let's talk spoilers for Kings of the Wild now.
Everyone dies.
Right. Everyone is
They're
dead.
all dead. They fail.
They fail.
They die and
they
then
actually
come back, and then
get
they
out of bed,
die.
their knees pop, they roll their ankles, and they just stay at home.
Yeah.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. Rose dies. Second book is a prequel. Yeah.
Oh God.
Yeah.
The third book is Golden Gabe in a retirement home.
Yeah. It was all a dream.
It was all a dream.
It
Yeah.
was all a dream.
My favorite scene, because I've got to jump out and snag it, is
Oh.
the giants, the two-headed
yeah.
giant,
Yeah.
and I forget their names, but their relationship.
Isn't it
was
Gregory and
so-
Dane?
Gregor and Dane. Yeah.
Gregor and Dane.
Yeah.
Their relationship was so fantastic, and the way that ended. Were you trying to hurt me? Like, were you writing this book thinking, you know what? Screw that guy. Let's make him cry.
Yeah. That's pretty much my goal. Well, to the whole kind of book, I was like I said, it was supposed to be a rebuttal of everything I've been reading and writing up until then, or in the 10 years before. So I was almost determined not to have anyone die, or any really lasting negative repercussions on anyone. I was like, God damn it. You know what book has that? Every book has that.
Yeah.
So let's just have one where it's fun. But I got to that point and things were getting pretty dramatic. And I don't know, I just felt like I just was thinking about the end battle. And I thought, I've got so many pieces that I don't really need this one. And his end, it just kind of worked. It just kind of fit. And that goes for deaths. We won't get into the Bloody Rose spoilers yet, but deaths in the second book too.
That would hurt.
you just kind of feel it coming before it's coming, you know, and you're like, okay, this can happen.
But like,
Yeah,
speaking
that
of
was
death
painful.
in Kings of the Wild, though, I was buddy reading this with Jessi as she was rereading it for a second time, and every time I was like, Maddie was my favorite character in Kings of the Wild, and I got to the point where he was dead in like the first couple chapters, and I'm like messaging Jessi, and I'm like, how is he dead already? And she's like, just wait.
Just read the book.
I can't say anything. And then I kept reading. I'm like, okay, I'm calm now. I'm better. And then we got to the next death, and I'm like, how can you kill off the main character in like the first third of the book? What's going to happen in the rest of the book now? Jessi's like, calm down.
Yeah.
Just wait.
Well, I can't say anything, but
it's stuff like that. So, like, my buddy Nico read the book, and somebody had told him that this book was grimdark, and I was like, no, this book is not grimdark.
Yeah.
And so he went in with the wrong expectation.
Yeah.
And so, like, I was like, you need to reread it with no expectation. And now that I know there's a music list, he actually he does screamo metal music.
Yeah.
With Fletcher, Michael Fletcher. He and Fletcher collab.
Oh.
And so I need to get him to reread it with that playlist now.
Yeah. When I recommend these books, I tell people the books don't take themselves seriously, so just go into it looking for a good time, and you'll absolutely love it.
Yes.
If you go into expecting a high fantasy and crazy adventures and serious prose the entire time, darkness and everything, you're not going to appreciate the book for what it is. Like, part of the reason why the guys were so memorable is because they didn't take themselves seriously. They made fun of each other and themselves at the same time. And that was part of the reason why especially Kings of the Wild was so endearing to me, because it was just a good time.
Yeah. I think the book can, like, there's a certain reader that it's just not going to appeal to at this time in their reading career and in their life in general. I've often think of it as a book that's like, it's for people that have either read a ton of fantasy and are looking for a book that's just going to celebrate all that, or someone that's never read fantasy that, it's not going to be overly complex. It's not going to hit you with names like Gwydion right off the bat, and even in the first 3 chapters, it's not going to, if it brings up a fantasy creature, it makes fun of it immediately. Yeah. And so I, as someone who spent their whole life trying to get people to read fantasy books, non-fantasy readers, I should say, it's so important to me to write a book that you could give to hopefully anyone, and it would hopefully kind of ease them in. But you're going to get someone who was like me in my early 30s who didn't like goblins, thought they were too good for it, and hate it, and justifiably so. I got nothing against if that person hates Kings of the Wild. Try it again in 10 years. You might like it.
Have you read Black Tongue Thief yet?
Have I read Black Tongue Thief? First of all, this is it right here.
Yeah, just finished it.
I'm on the cover of that book 3 times, actually.
Speaking of goblins.
Yeah, love it.
I haven't gotten to that one yet.
Oh, it's fun. If you're looking for a tide me over for the 3rd banned book, Black Tongue Thief, your jam.
It's incredible. And I don't know if I can necessarily, I don't think it's a big secret, but I was asked recently, there's a small press doing a limited special edition of Black Tongue Thief, and they asked me to look forward to it. Because it shares it's the same editor as Kings of the Wild, the same woman that picked it up. She works for Tor now. And Black Tongue Thief, so I started this morning, a reread of it, or at least half of it, because I just want to have it a bit more things fresh in my mind. I read the first chapter, it's 5 pages, and I must have howled laughing probably 8 times. Like, howled laughing. It is.
It's got a great audio too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Buellman does his own audio on that,
awesome.
on that book.
Oh, I know.
And I didn't know he had an Irish accent. It's either Irish or Scottish. I'm gonna get it wrong.
Yeah,
it's one of those two. But he adds an additional bit of roguishness. That's how I picture like Maddie sounding.
I bet that's great. Yeah,
it's fantastic. I picture Maddie having Buellman's voice in that audiobook, but a little more out of shape.
Yeah.
Some wheezing
Little
going
older.
on there.
Yeah, a little bit more out of breath.
Yeah.
A little bit more in his cups.
Well, if you like Kings of the Wild, it's hard to imagine you wouldn't like the Black Tongue Thief because it's I don't know. I want to say it's funnier just because it's so goddamn funny and sentimental at some points. And at one point,
Oh, don't freeze. Not like that. Not right there. That is the worst place to freeze.
It'll be fine.
oh,
You
Why,
froze.
what did I
You
say?
froze right when you were about to tell us something, and my heart broke.
I just said it was horrifying. Speaking of goblins,
Oh, okay.
I think like Kings of the Wild and Bloody Rose both have a certain sense of humor, but they also touch on we also have those serious moments.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite scenes was when Maddie is talking about his kids back home, that none of them are his biological kids, but to him they're his kids,
But he still wants to escape.
I mean, same.
well, he's going to be
Mine
murdered
are
for God's sake.
biological.
yeah, I mean his wife wants to kill him, so
I
But
mean,
he-
what wife doesn't?
Hmm.
Yeah, man.
Jesse.
And I think Maddie in that scene too, Maddie gives a pretty good reason why his wife would want to kill him. He doesn't even blame her, you know. He's
yeah,
like,
he
I'm a
gets
piece of
it.
shit husband.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
But it just felt like it captured the true spirit of a foster dad or an adopted dad, in that sense where he knows they haven't talked about it, but he knows not one of them are his biological kids, but he loves them
Yeah.
just the same. And that really endeared me to Maddie and put him kind of over the top of the other characters. Everyone is a great character, but for me, Maddie just kind of slid slightly to the top because you had that emotional scene with him where he takes these kids. He knows his wife has been cheating on him this whole time, and not one of them are his. But he still loves them just the same. And that just I read that and I was just a crying mess.
Well, that's good
Well,
to hear. Thank
the
you for saying so.
The crying mess part for me was when Moog discovers that there's been a cure for the rot the entire time. And he lost his partner to the rot,
Yes.
even though he has been searching for decades.
Yeah.
Like, literally, they're taught to avoid the place that has the cure, and he could have saved his partner.
Yeah.
And watching him, reading him process that is heartbreaking.
Absolutely.
yeah, that's the part that got me too. I didn't cry as much in Kings of the Wild as I did in Bloody Rose, but that is the part that got me.
Well, Bloody Rose is more grunge. It's meant to get you in the feels.
It got me in the feels. Okay,
I'm a big
We'll
crier,
talk
and
about
I
that
cried
later.
a lot in both. So
I always
Yeah, I'm also a
look
big
at Kings of
crier,
the
and I
Wild as hair
definitely
metal's
cried
last
reading
ride.
them, so.
every time we had a death, I cried, and then every time it was revealed that it was a fake death, I cried. And
Did you cry when Clay Cooper yeeted that dude out of the airship?
I liked that part.
I cheered out loud.
I was like, yeah.
He's like, I'm gonna find your family. He's like, I'm gonna throw you out of this airship.
Yeah. And then I went and took a shot.
Right.
Calarac was actually one of my guest last names at Fable when I worked at a restaurant. Their last name was Calarac or something close to that. And I'm like, can I use your last name in my book? Because it's awesome.
That's so cool.
I'm
That's
sure they're
great.
honored that you made him such a piece of garbage.
Yeah.
He was particularly cutthroat.
Yeah.
He lasted longer than I thought he would. Honestly, with Gabe was just being a big old wuss, pretty much. The first half of that book. He's like, I want my sword back.
Yeah.
And finally, when he finally, I'm trying to be polite. I'm trying not to say sack up, but now that I've already said it.
Now that you said it.
Yeah,
You've
now that I've
committed.
said it. When he finally picks up the sword and starts fighting. Oh, that was so good.
Yeah.
But like he's just being dragged around by Clay Cooper, and Clay Cooper is just like, come on, dude.
Who didn't even want to do it to start with.
Right? And he's like,
His daughter made him do it.
just get this over with.
I don't know. I love their relationship.
Yeah. Which is part of what book 2.
What was your favorite scene to write?
Probably the final battle. Kind of in both books, it's one of those things where, for me at least, way early on in every book, I kind of know what's going to happen in that final battle, and a song kind of comes along that gets in my head that I know it's going to be the soundtrack to the final battle. With Bloody Rose, it did actually kind of switch, and there's a few songs that work out really well, but with Kings of the Wyld, it was always going to be Freebird. It was never anything but Freebird. It could never be anything but Freebird. Freebird's the ultimate climax song of all time. So I would walk to work every day, and I would listen to Freebird, and I would kind of imagine almost like a movie version of that scene where the portal was open and the bands were pouring out. And as each band poured out, their name would be like at the bottom kind of thing, and just like over and over. And then pretty soon you'd get like a 4 split screen and then an 8 split screen and just bands coming. And kind of that scene was so exciting. But by the time I got there, it was just like, pretty easy to write because I'd been dreaming of it for 2 years. So.
This is why we need a movie now. Like we need the adaptation.
I
don't want an adaptation. I either make it anime or don't do live action. I feel like live action's not going to do it justice. Like there's no way. There's no way they're going to get it right.
Well, live action's always going to be constrained by its budget, but boy, now that I've seen Arcane, it's like, God, let them do it.
Animation, yeah.
I always pictured it to be something like a giant WWE, WWF fight, where you just have like people coming out of nowhere and these crazy entrances and music blasting as they walk in and smoke and
yeah.
You've got like Gravedigger popping out the back.
I mean, he gives that big old speech. He's like, yeah, you can hang out here having your party, or you can come kick some dragon ass with us. And then they jump through the portal, basically.
I thought it was a pretty compelling speech.
Right?
Yeah, that big long. But it was like, it never felt like it was too long. Because he was just like, he's like, hey, we're washed up. Saga used to be the best. And he's like, you know what? By accident, we caused all this chaos. He's like, so if you want to get on our level, come with us.
Yeah.
And it was just like, yeah. Like these old fogies still got it.
Yeah.
And killed every single bard that they've ever had.
I mean, yeah.
Well, that's part of what moves in. It's like the theme of the book itself, and it's a big theme of Bloody Rose is like when you get those bands in the 80s that were trying to emulate what had become big in the 70s, that's kind of stadium rock. And Led Zeppelin or AC/DC and like those bands, the Who, they went hard, but they didn't have any. They were the first to do it. They didn't have any predecessors. Like, it's not like the Beatles were out there throwing burning mattresses off their balconies and riding motorcycles through the hallway. They were pretty well behaved by comparison. Right. But then you got to the 80s, which is kind of what inspired most of Bloody Rose. And you got these bands that were like, well, we have to be bigger. We have to be louder. We have to be crazier. We have to do crazier shit. We have to do harder drugs. We have to stay up later and go nuts. And that's what is the impetus for, in the end, Kings of the Wyld. Of course, those bands leap at the chance to get glory in one fell swoop,
Like I read the memoir written by Steven Tyler from Aerosmith, and he writes about how even before he became the lead singer of Aerosmith, people were comparing him to Mick Jagger all the time because he looked just like Mick Jagger growing up. And then once he, was part of a band, then it was just natural for him to emulate the Stones because people thought he was Mick Jagger anyways. So
not with those lips. I never really thought about it.
But
yeah, I never really thought about that.
I never thought about that either. But that's how I love, like, in Bloody Rose, how it starts out with like, you know, that Saga killed literally every single one of their bards. And then in Bloody Rose, our main character's bard.
Yeah.
I love
Like,
Tam.
I loved him. I
Me
love
too.
that we followed, like, that we were in her head as the bard and not like, you know, Rose's as the like badass warrior, because
Yeah.
it's like a completely different perspective than I think we're used to, because normally it's like the bard's just like kind of there, but not in this one. She is the bard.
Well, and it subverted my expectation when I started Bloody Rose, because obviously the name of the book is Rose.
Right.
And so, like, I was just like, oh, obviously, because this is before I picked the book, I'm going to be following Rose's POV. No, so I'm opening the book and I'm reading it and I'm like, who the crap is Tam?
Right. Like,
Well, the each book is kind of like, you know, this first one obviously uses one of the most famous rock band tropes in the world, which is let's get the band back together. And that's why, I mean, the first book, it's hard to imagine anything being necessarily funnier than that book, only because the idea itself is inherently funny. Old guys going out on the road is inherently funny. Way funnier than like a band in their prime. Trying to make that funny is much more difficult, obviously.
Yeah.
And so the second book is the next most famous rock trope that I know, which is like the rock journalist going on the road with the band, kind of like Almost Famous. So it's kind of like my version of that. So
I love that.
Yeah.
What I loved about Tam was that, especially towards the end of Bloody Rose, so now we're getting to spoilers about Bloody Rose. So if you don't want to be spoiled, then plug your ears. Especially towards the end of the book, we get her dilemma of, I'm the bard and I'm supposed to be standing by and watching and essentially taking notes so I can write songs about what happens, but I'm also part of this family and I want to defend my family and I want a bigger part in this besides just the wallflower that watches. And I just loved seeing that dilemma and watching Tam have to make those decisions on the spot in the middle of battle.
Yeah, and I think that's, I feel like I kind of lucked into so many of the characters in those books, but Tam, it was a character that took me a while to really find her voice, and I was, halfway through the writing Bloody Rose, it was a character named Tom was the main character, and I didn't like the way Tom was like interacting with like Rose and Kira and Brune. It wasn't bad. It was just really typical, and my editor we had talked about maybe changing it to a woman instead, and I was like, I'm going to do it. And it's not obviously as easy as changing the he's to she's because every interaction is kind of different. And then I did that, and I got about 3/4 of the way through Bloody Rose, and I had a different opening, a different beginning of the book. And my editor was she was like, well, can we maybe get it like sentimental, like the opening of Kings of the Wild? So I went back and rewrote her current opening. And that changed everything about her, who her mother was, how her mother had died, her father, everything changed. So I had to rewrite every single scene again. I kept all the same plot points, but I had to rewrite every single thing because her interaction with everyone is different.
I love that she represents the LGBT community out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
She's a great representation for that community. You don't see that a lot in fantasy. At least I'm still relatively new to fantasy, but a lot of times you get like the very tropey characters that are the LGBT characters, where Tam is very memorable and personable, and she's trying to figure this all out while we're going on this journey and trying to figure out what this means for her. And I think my favorite character in Bloody Rose was Kira.
I love
Kira.
Yeah. I loved Rose for multiple reasons, but I have to say, I think Rose was probably my favorite, but probably for reasons that are not expected from most people.
Well, before we move past the LGBTQ subject, one of the things I love about Bloody Rose is how natural Tam and Kira's relationship evolves. And how it doesn't feel like you were ticking a box. So like, I have to make this an inclusive book. Instead, the story flows naturally and their relationship progresses in such a way that I didn't see it coming, But while it's happening, I'm like, well, yeah, totally, this makes sense. And I loved like that. It felt like falling in love. It didn't feel like I am writing an LGBTQ book
Right.
to try and tick a box here. It felt so natural and well done that like it didn't even cross my mind I was reading an LGBTQ character.
Right.
I was just reading two people in love.
Yeah.
Or two people
That's
developing a relationship.
I agree.
And it's not something that I planned from the beginning either. It was more just like they're in scenes together. They interact with each other. They're obviously two very, very different people, polar opposite people, really.
You should see me and my wife.
Yeah.
Very opposite people.
But yeah, you just kind of put them in enough scenes together, and just kind of, it was a matter of just kind of almost seeing if it worked, seeing if their personalities, could mix. And by the time there is a scene where they're in way up north and they're the two of them staying in a thing together, and Kira's kind of helping Tam come up with her song, and they kind of sing together.
Yeah.
I think. But yeah, that was kind of, I was like, okay, well, it's got to happen now.
I love that.
That scene
And then it just makes for some hijinks when they first kind of get together and things don't really go off that well.
That's what it made feel natural, though. It wasn't just an instant connection.
Yeah.
Right.
Like Kira's just like, nah, you were just a little bit aside.
Yeah.
Right. And then you get to
Slept
see like
in the
that
same bed,
softer
that's it.
side of Kira that you don't really get.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? I like this.
Well, and both with Tam and Mook's characters, like when I was reading them, I'm like, of course they're gay because that's their character. It wasn't like Andrew said, it didn't feel forced. It was just who those characters were, and I was like, yeah, of course it. Like a lot of times I come across an LGBT character and I'm like, it's like almost like thrown in your face, and you're like, okay, but why does this character have to be this way? But with Tam and Moog, I was like, of course they are, because that's just who they are. It just felt so natural that it was like,
It never became a selling point of the book. It was just the fact of these are who these characters are. Yeah. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Not like how, I mean, in a lot of books, and in not really so much in adult fantasy, but more so in YA right now.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of box checking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, fantasy's definitely getting better at having characters who are of various sexualities, and their sexuality not being a focal point of the book. I'm hardly the first, but I was hoping, obviously, to do it well. So, yeah.
You have achieved that.
I believe you have, in fact, checked that particular box. My favorite scene with Kira is when it's towards the end of the book, if I'm remembering correctly, and she's just unleashing hell with all of her tattoos, and they're ripping out of her body, and I believe they don't come back.
Right.
That's correct. Yeah.
It's been over about a year to a year and a half since I read that scene, and that scene has stuck with me through I've read 120 books since then.
Yeah.
And I still remember that scene.
I still love there is the one bed trope, but the way it was done, I was just howling. It was so funny because it's like, there is two beds, but she's like, nope.
Yeah.
Straight out the window. What now?
Yeah.
And then it was brought back again at the end. They were like, of course, we're stuck in the one bed again.
Yeah.
One bed bedroom again.
Yeah, no, I like that scene too. And obviously any scene where Kira got to summon her things, obviously almost in every scene I tried to introduce a new one. So that was kind of fun for me to make them up, and not even necessarily flesh out the backstory as to why that caused her trauma, that particular tattoo, but just to make it interesting.
The Bloody Rose tattoo was bad.
It was.
I think so,
That
yeah.
was my favorite scene in the whole book, when we got to see Kira creating the Bloody Rose tattoo, and she's explaining to Tam kind of what's happening, and that like super intimate moment with those two characters was just so real and so intimate. I felt like I was like almost like
intruding on
something. On the wall. You felt like a peeping Tom, didn't you? That's what I did.
I was reading that while I was at work today, and I'm like messaging Jessi, and I'm like, I feel like I need to like go and cool down and take a cold shower right now.
Wow, you really powered through that end of that book if you read it all. You're reading that
Oh, I
all
had
at
like 200 pages
Yes,
and I started today.
I only read the last 50 today. But that ending. But that scene where she's tattooing herself, though, as someone that has multiple tattoos, I don't know if I loved it or if it made me cringe. Because like,
Oh, good.
well, like I'm on hour like 20 of my back piece.
Yeah.
So like the idea of it, I'm like, oh, I know how bad that
Yeah.
hurts.
Perfect. Well, I have no tattoos, so I was winging it.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
I love the idea also that her tattoos are basically her biggest fears.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Whereas a lot of people have tattoos of things that are sentimental to them or, things that they love. But for Kira, it's her biggest fears. And then that's kind of like her magical power is that they come to life and they wreak havoc on everyone else. She uses her fears instead of, letting them eat her up. She uses them to kind of essentially do good in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's definitely one of those things where, I mean, her tattoos evolved. When I first started writing the book, they weren't that. And then they evolved into that. And looking back, I'm just like, how the fuck did I come up with that?
But
Love
like
it.
it goes even a step
Yeah.
further because it ties back and goes deeper because of the rose tattoo.
Yeah.
And it defines a little bit of the relationship and then really puts in perspective how all of the bandmates are seeing Rose just go down this self-destructive
Right.
just hill
Yeah.
of drugs and destroying her family and everything that's involved.
So earlier, Stacy asked, when you were talking about working in a bar and a restaurant,
Oh yeah.
Stacy wondered how much of you was in Tam, knowing that Tam starts off working at a bar and you were working at a bar.
Well, Tam, I mean, obviously Tam and Clay are both, the most me in those books. They're the most, they're sentimental. Tam's very sentimental in similar ways that I am. And in Bloody Rose, a lot of them, the way it's kind of set up is that we're in the first book, every person is like a member of the band, like an actual, like Clay represents the bassist, Ganelon is the axe man, Moog is the keyboard, triangle kazoo guy, Matrix obviously the drummer. But in Bloody Rose, each person represents a genre of 80s music. So, Brune is like the hair metal. Free Cloud is like the pop, like the Aha, Take Me On or Take On Me. Cure is kind of like the punk, or Cure is like literally named for the Cure. So she's obviously like the goth. Rose is kind of like the punk. And then Tam is pretty much just like Journey and Stevie Nicks,
Yeah.
Which is referenced very, very, very heavily in the first few chapters. In that,
Mm-hmm.
one of her chapters, someone literally says her age is at the age of 17, which is a Stevie Nicks song.
Yep.
And then she takes, and it's someone who worked in a bar where every single night when the bar closed, we played "Don't Stop Believing" by Journey, full blast, and everyone at the bar sang it.
Yes.
Literally
You have
takes
to.
the midnight train home
Right.
that night. A direct rip from that song, and it's a very small one, but it's there.
I can say as a former bartender, anytime that there's a few songs, and that is one of them, that anytime it comes on,
You can't.
every person, drunk or sober, is going to start singing.
Yeah, and some of those I love, and then some of them are called Sweet Caroline.
Yes. That is. Yeah.
Yeah.
That always happens.
One of my I call him my soul people, my soul person is George Michael. And when I read the Wham reference,
Yeah.
I was like, I had to like set the book down
Nice.
and go take a drink and just like take a breather because like for very sentimental reasons and for very deep reasons, George Michael and his music basically saved my life in a lot of different ways. I was very depressed and suicidal, and I turned on American Idol one night, and Clay Aiken was singing "Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me" by Elton John, and then that led me to a George Michael edition of that where he's singing it with Elton John, and that led me into the Wham world. And ever since then, like, George Michael is my person and just like speaks to me through his music. And when we lost him a couple years ago, I was completely wrecked. And now no one even, like, I work in a law school with kids that don't even know who any of these references are.
Yeah.
And so to be able to see, like, I was reading Kings of the Wyld and I'm like, these references are great, but they speak to my, like, childhood. I was raised on 80s rock, hair bands, Aerosmith. We went to see an Aerosmith and Kiss concert as a family vacation.
Jealous.
But I'm like, where is my 80s music that speaks to me?
Yeah.
And then I got to Bloody Rose, and I'm like, we have Wham, and we have Prince, and
I loved the Prince reference, like, especially since I just got that biography from Kate, actually, Prince's biography, and I was like,
I didn't catch any of the references because I am just a straight fantasy reader.
Yeah.
And so even though I love metal and I love the 80s and, like, I'm a huge AC/DC fan, Aerosmith.
Yes.
I wasn't looking for it, and so I didn't catch it. So I need to do a reread.
That's kind of the point, is that because, like, my editor didn't catch them either, and the whole point is that kind of, you can, if you're not going to get them, you're not going to get them. It's totally fine.
Slipping it past the censor is what you were doing.
Yeah. But I mean, God, there are, especially in King, I mean, both of them. They're both of them. They have hundreds and hundreds. Any weapon, any airship, any town, almost everyone is named after something.
Right. But, like, Wham was, like, very.
It was literally
Wham had the exclamation point at the end.
Yeah, I think it was even all capitals, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah.
So what is a Grandjewel a reference to?
Grandjewel's not. Grandjewel's just like, I don't know where the hell that came from. And actually, all the northern cities are kind of named after scotches. They're like versions
I
of them.
appreciate that.
Yeah, like Talistard is.
I prefer bourbon, but I still appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, can we talk about how great your maps are?
Oh, I know. They're beautiful.
great maps.
Yeah.
Who did you do your maps?
God, no.
No. Oh,
And
God,
I used
no.
to draw, like, I used to draw fantasy maps. I thought I was great at it, but it just so happened that the day, and I didn't have a map for Kings of the Wyld. I didn't want one at first because I didn't want it to. I didn't want people to be able to pin me down, being like, "Oh, but you said this is here and this is here," and they traveled. You know, what do you mean if it's 1,000 miles across? But they really wanted a map, and so the day I got put in touch with my map guy, his name is Tim Paul. I happened to be visiting my mom, and in her basement, I found this old copy of The Hobbit that had a fold-out map. And so I sent him an email, and I was like, hey, as a map lover, you might like this. And so I think that was kind of in his head, because obviously he used the same style. I say this because I've got a map on my wall.
I love it.
That's so cool.
Nice.
Yeah. And so, yeah, he did use the copy or the style of, like, Lord of the Rings maps. The trees and the mountains are drawn the same way. The lettering, the color map is the same, like, you know, parchment yellow. So yeah, I love that map, and you know, those forests. It took them forever.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's a hand-drawn map instead of a computer-generated?
I don't know. I think he must computer generate, but I know, like, I saw it in various stages, and I know there's something computer, like, he uses about it, but he did have to do most of the trees separately, I think, because it took him a long time.
Forever.
And I would see it, and he would have it like a quarter done and then half done, and I feel like if it was computer generated, it would just be like that. But
you can tell him it's very appreciative.
It's a very beautiful map.
Perfect. Yeah, and there's also, I mean, and these are also under the radar. Some of them are not so hidden, but, like, there's some movie references, not always 80s in Bloody Rose, but there's a very, very obvious Dumb and Dumber reference where someone's like, you've had a second pair of gloves this whole time.
I got that one.
You know?
The whole time?
Yeah. And then there's a very, 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 this is not kind of spoilery, but a very, very hard to find, even though, like, 2 people have caught it, Say Anything reference, which is a phenomenal 80s movie by Cameron Crowe, who did, you know, Almost Famous. And it's when Kira gives Tam the knife, And Tam is like, I gave her my heart and she gave me a knife, because it's like when Lloyd gets that pen, he's like, I gave her my heart and she gave me a pen. And I
The
tried
fact I missed that, I'm now upset with myself.
Yeah, but it's pretty subtle. It's pretty subtle. So I tried to like, make it not too awkward and feel natural and have the moments leading up to it, work. But yeah, they're in there.
While we're talking about Bloody Rose, I feel like we got to talk about how did it feel to kill Golden Gabe?
Awful. It's definitely
fantastic.
Yeah, it was definitely like that chapter 43 of the second book. And actually, I was looking at, I had a Facebook memory the other day that chapter 43 of Kings of the Wyld is called A Grave in the Clouds. And it's the chapter when Clay falls off the bridge and you think that he might be dead. And I was like, wow, what's it with me in chapter 43? I seem to hit my emotional peak right about then. But Gabe's death is once again something I didn't plan whatsoever. But it just was the point where it's like how she's made this promise to Free Cloud. She's killed the Dragon Eater. There's no way she's going to fight in this final battle because, despite her character, like her family is important to her. Her daughter is important to her. Free Cloud isn't most important to her. And so she's not going to go. And then I was like, how am I going to get her to go? And I'm like, it's got to be Gabe. If the queen kills Gabriel, she's going to fucking lose it. And she's going to I'm going to get her to that final battle. So that's kind of what had to be done. And my brother and I always proofread the books. They send you in a big fat paper copy of it and you can read it one more time to pick out stuff. And my brother does it with me.
Thick old boy.
I'm about 20 minutes ahead of him. So when I got to that scene, I just bawled and bawled and bawled. And 20 minutes later, he gets to that scene and bawled and bawled and bawled. To this day, I think the final paragraph of that chapter is the best thing I've ever written and maybe ever will. Who knows?
What was so poignant for me? What was so poignant for me was how involved Clay was with dealing with Gabe's death. Because obviously, Rose knew Clay Cooper, and the fact that Clay was there, like they roll up in that cart, and like Clay's just like basically get out of my way. I'm taking his body.
Yeah, that image of him carrying Gabe's body, I was reading it while I was sitting at my desk at work, and I just
why
would you do that to yourself?
Because I didn't know what was going to happen, and then Kings of the Wyld has me expecting these deaths, and then people coming back from the dead. Big death.
Oh, you thought it was a fake out?
He can't be really dead. This is not true. He's going to wake up at some point.
He dead. I say you. He dead.
I say you.
And that scene's obviously more sad for people that have read Kings of the Wyld because it's obviously not so much Rose's reaction to it, but to me at least, it's like Moog's reaction to it, and mostly Clay's reaction to it. And I think, even Twitter yesterday, there was somebody who just read Bloody Rose for the first time, and they haven't even read Kings of the Wyld yet. And I think going back and reading this one first and then reading Kings of the Wyld, I think it would make Kings of the Wyld really, really, really poignant because all those scenes with Clay and Gabe and what Clay does for him and how Gabe goes after his daughter will be even more sentimental.
Her speech, her Rose's funeral speech. When she started out with like, "You are a shit father," basically, I loved it. Because it's like no parent's perfect, but it's like you were a terrible father, but
now I know
did
why.
all these things right. I get it. And I still loved you.
Yeah.
And now I know that you loved me.
Yeah.
He crossed the Heartwild horde.
Right.
I don't know.
She kind of resented him for it.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things. Her speech too is like, because not to give like too much away, but the third book is kind of like a band just getting together for the first time, so to speak. And I was recently rereading that scene for whatever reason, just because I wanted to make myself fucking cry. But when she talks about how you go on the road with these people and you before you realize it, you're not missing home anymore. The road is your home, and these people are your family. So it kind of helps remind me, like, what how that can happen, and
Yeah.
to make it happen in a subtle way.
Speaking of book 3, are we looking at what, like early 22, mid 2022?
We're looking at like
finish by sometime around then. We'll see. It's still pretty early on. It's been a rough one to start. I've started it so many times, but I do have a beginning finally nailed down that's not going to be changing. And obviously the characters are set. Really, the whole book is something that I've like had in my head for a long time, and it's just a matter of trying to fit everything in because it kind of technically is the final book for the time being anyway. And like, you want to wrap up all those stories. I mean, it takes place 20 years after Kings of the Wild.
oh.
So this is set in basically what would be our aughts style of music.
Yeah, but it's set in the 90s version of My World.
I'm so excited for like, isn't it like 90s hip hop?
Yeah.
Ish.
So whereas 80s was the whole like trying to do everything better than everything else. A lot of the 90s music, whether it's hip hop and grunge especially, and like Rage Against the Machine, are very like anti-establishment, and they're pissed. They're pissed. And it's music that I did not relate to as a very privileged kid growing up in the 90s. And obviously now it's a bit easier to see those perspectives. I used to hate Rage Against the Machine. Yeah, I hated them. And now I love them. Like I was an idiot. I was like, oh, they're just repeat the same word or sentence over and over and over again. But it's like, it's not getting into your fucking head.
Yeah.
Well,
now I'm expecting all the Rage Against the Machine references. Like,
there will be lots.
There's no rush. I just want it, ASAP.
like no rush, but
me too. Trust me, nobody wants it more.
Well, I know there's been speculation of, it's going to be out this year, and
Ren.
Oh yeah, Stacey, it's a pretty good theory. She's
like, speaking of scenes that made us cry,
everyone's theories about the third book are correct.
yes.
Someone's never guessed and been wrong. It's like someone's like, oh, I think it's going to be,
I was telling you my theory right before we went live.
You're right.
Yeah, there's actually and I can't remember, I think it's in there, but there's a very, 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 very subtle reference to Ren in the very first book. I think Clay, when he has to put that helmet when he leaves town, and he takes it off and he throws it in the ditch, and there's a bunch of other ones, and a Ren comes and lands on her, makes a nest in her or something like that. Just because I think I knew then that I was going to use her in the third book. So yeah, she'll be around. Yeah, basically, I mean, anyone who didn't die in the other books will be.
Yes.
So you're saying I'm getting more Moog?
Unless I forget.
I'm getting old man Moog.
Old man.
Name a major character that's been in other books that won't be returned in some way, because it's got to be. It's got to be that final.
Yeah.
Got to have everyone. It's got to please as many people as possible, including myself. So.
Nah, don't worry about them. Just worry about us.
I'm by those characters too, like everyone. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
So we don't want to
scenes
take up.
that made us cry though. For me, that very last page of the epilogue.
Oh yeah.
Like I said, Rose is probably my favorite for probably reasons different than a lot of people. I became a mom pretty young and did not want to be a mom when I became a mom. So seeing Rose struggle with the fact that she didn't really want to be a mom, but she does, but she doesn't, and she really struggles with that. Like, I related so much to that.
Yeah.
And like in general, motherhood and fantasy, especially adult fantasy, is not something we explore or see, or I talk about that a lot on my channel. But like that ending when she just calls her mommy and she's like, that sounds like a good name to take on. I lost it. I texted our group chat and I was like, I'm done. I'm broke.
That makes me really happy to hear.
So that's what you meant. Okay.
Rose gets a lot of hate for not being likable, and she's not supposed to be. As I tell people, I'm like, well, if you were on the road with Axl Rose, who she's literally named after, do you think you would be like, Axl Rose is a really swell guy? Yeah. What a hero.
Right.
No, you'd fucking hate him. But he's still the person that drags Guns N' Roses along with him,
Right.
And they're not them without him. So, and you don't see characters. Obviously, you see characters that are mothers, but you don't see characters that motherhood is not their main thing.
Yeah.
very often, I don't think.
No.
And so, yeah, it's just like, I'm sorry, but my dreams are more important than anything else right now. Yeah.
Sometimes it takes you a while to fall into that routine of like, okay, this is my life now.
I really, really appreciate you saying that it resonated with you. It makes me happy to hear. Thank you.
And then I cried like a little child. And I was like, I need to go feed my kids dinner now. Like,
well, we'll see how Ren turns out 14 years later to see if she's really a good mom or not.
yeah. I expect she'll be like her father. You were a shit parent, but
Yeah.
So I want to open up our conversation to the folks that are watching this and see if they have any questions that they want to ask while they have a chance. We don't want to take up too much of your time, but for those folks that joined us, we have one question from Jake, who's a big drummer. He's the Bookish drummer on YouTube, and he's planning a video, he said, of all of the music references.
Nice.
And Kings of the Wyld. Jake asks, since Skull Drummer is my favorite character, who's your favorite drummer and why is it John Bonham?
Well, that's not even a joke. It's obviously John Bonham because he's the best drummer of all time. Yeah, he definitely is. I mean, when I wrote, especially Matrix thing at the end of the book, when Matrix has to fights all of Larkspur's thralls by himself, I just put on Moby Dick on repeat over and over and over and try to use words that were like drumming related. And yeah, I once heard or read a thing that was like John Bonham was described as like a one-man like artillery barrage or something like that. But yeah, he's just damn good. He's just damn good. He looked awesome. He had a sweet mustache, great hair. And yeah, he was just cool. There's obviously some other great drummers out there. Keith Moon, obviously. Neil Peart from Rush. Hello. Yeah. But John Bonham was just...
I'm not hearing any love for Ringo.
Ringo who?
How dare you?
I was
we can no longer be friends.
I was raised by my stepdad, who's a big guitarist. So I knew all of the 80s guitarists growing up. But like I said, my mom and my stepdad were huge Aerosmith fans. So we were big Joe Perry fans.
Yeah, there's a lot of guitarists to choose from out there, that's for sure. And then, I mean, even more, like a bit more modern, I should say, because I'm listening to all 90s music now. But obviously, the Foo Fighters drummer, Travis, I forget what his name is phenomenal. And Dave Grohl, whose biography I just listened to, is great too.
Didn't he narrate it himself?
Yeah, he narrates it himself. It's pretty great.
Look at Jessi. Jessi's all excited.
Right? I mean,
the Freebird version for the third book is Everlong, which is the song that I just listened to it over and over and over and over, and just think of the final battle.
That's amazing.
For you.
I know, right? I think one of my favorite drummers has to be the Rev
really kind of fit too. It's like, will things ever be this good? That could have fit for Kings of the Wyld too, It's about capturing that moment where you're like, things are going to change after this. We're going to get old.
That's funny. I was just talking to my friend who plays drums. He's the guy that does all my tattoos. Yeah. And we were talking about, now that the stuff's starting to open back up a little bit, I'm like, I really want to go to another concert. It's been years since I've been to a concert. I was like, I want to go see Avenged Sevenfold again.
Yeah.
He's like, did you go pre-Rev, like when he was alive, or like, have you seen them since? I was like, I haven't seen them since he passed away. He's like, don't do it. He's like, he's like, there's literally
their shows are fine.
I mean, I still want to go, but like, you can't touch the Rev as far as drummers. Like, he was pretty fantastic.
Well, Zeppelin never replaced Bonham.
Right?
You should go see Avenged Sevenfold.
Again?
I've seen them 3 times.
They are amazing.
Is there anything else that you can tell us about book 3?
Let's see. Sure. Well, I mean, I've said this before, so it's not like a crazy surprise, but the character in that book that is like my go-to for funny lines and whatever I want to get away with character is a kobold named Short Knife.
Yes.
is briefly seen in the very first book when they go to Fender's house to get Gabe's money. There's one of his chittens has a nest that's filled with little weapons, and Gabriel says, "Oh, that's Short Knife. He's a bit off." Yeah, so Short Knife is.
I forgot about them.
I did too.
He's one of the main characters. He's, and
I'm excited.
I love him already. I haven't written that much of him yet, but
I have a feeling book 3 is going to be my favorite.
I'm excited to see more of the monsters as like.
I don't even care. It's all about the band dynamics.
Yeah, it's got an interesting dynamic. I think to start, it's got obviously we'll have all these '90s references that maybe a lot more people will get.
I was born in 1990, so I'll get them probably.
Yes.
But yeah, so we'll see. I mean, it is a bit more difficult book to make funny just because 90s music does not lend itself to humor very well. It's inspirational for anger.
Yeah.
But not so much.
I mean, you've got the Bloodhound Gang.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, it'll work, and hopefully it'll be all wrap all that story up, all those character arcs come to a satisfying conclusion.
Are we gonna get any Weird Al references?
God, I don't know. Weird Al could be 80s too, but I don't know.
I mean, if you're strapped for humor,
Right.
Yeah,
generations.
Yeah. Weird Al might get it on the nose if I just put a character in there called Weird Al. I'm sure he wouldn't even mind. But you know what's funny? When I moved to Kingston, Ontario, which is the home of the band The Tragically Hip, and there's a few hip references in Kings of the Wyld. I didn't say anything, but I served a few members of that band at my restaurant, and I was like, should I tell them? No. Yeah.
I'm just gonna put it out here now. If a character named Weird Al makes it in there, I'm gonna claim responsibility.
It'll be your proudest moment, Andrew.
It'll be one of my proudest moments.
Yeah. I don't know. Weird Al. I mean, the name is pretty close on the nose, but we'll see. I got someone called Neil the Young in the first one, so that's pretty on the nose too.
Whatever you can get away with.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. It's one of the funnest series that I've read in a long time. Like I hadn't read it. It's been a year of reading fantasy, and it took The Black Tongue Thief earlier to even come close to the humor and the love that is in Kings of the Wyld. Like, don't get me wrong, there's always Terry Pratchett, but Terry Pratchett came before.
Yeah.
And it's rare to find fantasy and humor mixed together in a great balance. And I love the band series for that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for saying so. Yeah, I tried to make it funny, but the sentimental parts just kind of slipped in there.
Right.
It works. It works.
It does.
Yeah.
Oh, I just thought of I don't know why I thought of it. One of my favorite scenes in the second book is when the band's fighting the Dragon Eater and Tam pushes Hawkshaw off the ship, and then she's talking to Doshi, and Roderick comes up and pushes him off, and he's like,
I thought that's what we were doing.
That's what was going on.
Well, humor comes from tragedy. It comes from pain. It comes from laughing at the dark. Like, they're almost made for each other. They go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So, I mean, gallows humor is a thing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so I just love the series. So thank you so much for giving us the band.
Yes, and I'm very excited for some 90s.
Thank you for reading it. Yeah.
Music.
And I'm still waiting on those special editions, by the way.
Yeah, well, hopefully there'll be hopefully that Andrew Read the Books did the hardcover to the first two, so hopefully they'll do a hardcover to the third, and you never know. I know when they did Bloody Rose, they reprinted some of the first one, so yeah, hopefully they'll do that. And
would love to snag those in hardcover.
Right.
Yeah, if I don't, they're not quite like popular enough to get like a 10-year anniversary edition or something like that of it, but
I disagree.
Maybe if it's up to be a TV show or something like that, they might do a 10-year anniversary edition of it.
Just hit up the Broken Binding. They got you probably.
Right.
They are pretty great about it.
Yeah, they are.
I don't know.
I'm still wanting this Broadway musical. Like, it's for some reason just stuck
You just
in my
can't.
head.
You can't get past the Broadway musical.
I
can
can't,
you?
because like that would just be. Whenever I tell somebody about the first book, like the first thing I compare it to is like This Is Spinal Tap.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I loved. So I'm
Yeah.
like, it's kind of like if you like This Is Spinal Tap, you might like this.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much where I got my drummers dying reference from, or my bards dying is their drummers joke. Yeah, we'll see.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope that
Yes.
you'll come back once book 3 comes out so we can
I'd love
chat
to.
again. Best of luck writing book 3. You've got 3 super fans right here dying for it.
You got a little more than 3.
Well,
Yeah, you're not counting my mom, guys. Come on.
Yeah, that's 4.
I mean,
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a blast.
Well,
Yes,
thank you for having me. Thank you for reading it. Thank you for spreading the word and infecting
I'm gonna go out
others.
and send 10
infecting
more
others
people
with
the book.
makes great Christmas gifts.
Yeah, perfect
Yeah.
stocking stuffers.
Yeah, it's a great audiobook too. It was my first audiobook.
Yeah.
And there's a of Kings of the Wild, there's an audiobook of Bloody Rose too, but there's a book track version of Kings of the Wild that has like music,
Yeah.
not like rock music, but it's like music put along to the
That's
scenes.
how I
and it's really
experienced Kings of the Wild. And the
Oh.
narrator is great too because he has like
I
different
didn't have
voices
the
for each
musical
of the characters.
version. I just had the straight audiobook.
Yeah, the musical versions that only came out within the last year or something like that. But
Okay.
Nerds!
I can't imagine what it would be like. But I hear it's great. So
Yeah, it was really great. Well, thank you guys so much for joining tonight. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Nicholas, for joining us.
Yes.
It's been a great chat.
thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great night, y'all.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.